First, I'm going to ask all of the speakers from this afternoon's session to take a chair up here on the stage. I think we'll have just enough chairs. And what I'm going to do is to ask the audience to think about some questions or uncertainties that you may have from any of the presentations this afternoon, or things that you'd like to know more about. So look, what I'm going to ask is just give your first name, whatever it is, and ask any of these guys, and I'll then, or multiple of them if you wish.
This is not fully formed. My name is Michael. And my first step would be to nationalize all the gas and coal producing companies and reduce export, but use any income we had to fund the changes needed. Would that work? For instance, one of the things I learned just the other day is that we use more energy to convert natural gas to liquefied gas than all of the transport and manufacturing industries combined use in terms of energy. So therefore, I think we should nationalize those companies and reduce export of liquid petroleum. Would that make a significant impact?
Who would like to have a go? And you're welcome to stand up here or grab one of these mics.
Sounds like a good idea. And I guess what it highlights is one of the first things that has to happen is, as you're clearly saying, is to close down coal and gas and oil as quickly as possible. And I guess underneath what you're saying there is that the barriers to that include the huge profits that can still be made out of that, the subsidies that apply, and the incentives around exports. So I guess my own quick points would be, is that technologically feasible and important? And in broad terms, I would argue that it is. The challenge is financially and over a rapid period of time. And I would have thought that increasingly the evidence is coming in that with the speed with which green hydrogen is becoming financially viable and competitive with other energy sources, that even the argument that says Australia can't afford that because we can't afford to reduce our exports, even that is becoming not true. And so that all the ducks are lining up technologically, financially, environmentally to say that a rapid exit from coal and oil and gas along the lines that you've talked about is both possible and desirable. But Mark, do you want to have a go?
Sure. So I think that the sort of challenge here is if you went down the nationalisation sort of route, that means you'd have a huge, massive amount of public funds going again into the hands of private companies, many of whom reside overseas. And that the big challenge is in terms of costing what that asset is valued. Yeah, well, that would destroy Australia's reputation as a place to do business, sovereign risk. So the reality, I think, is that that there is a pathway for these to essentially die a natural death, if you think of it like that. And the question, I think, is for the government as to whether they want to accelerate that trajectory in a way that doesn't require that massive payout of taxpayer dollars more than we're already forking out to the buggers, and that doesn't cause problematic reputational risks for Australia. From my perspective is that we just need to be generating better alternatives, and so it's the process through which renewables become a no-brainer in our systems, and so that the logic of actually keeping on burning coal and gas just essentially disappears, and that means we need to accelerate that part of the thing. So we don't try to kill off the coal and gas, we actually just try to build up the alternatives.
Sorry, I'll just add to that. We are actively subsidizing the industry. So it's not as if like we had an opportunity to privatize, publicly own most of our industry, in the same way that Norway has a huge fund, and Canada and Alaska, you know, like all these places that have these funds already set up. We privatized everything to be more like America. And that's not, is that this, you know, I don't think that's the spirit of Australia at all. And yet, you know, here we are. So 5-year royalty, you know, waivers on Adani or whatever other coal, gas, you know, diesel subsidies for, you know, fossil fuel industries, whatever other, you know, subsidies across all these industries. It's like, well, without those subsidies, does the industry even stand up in Australia? I don't know. What do you think? Without all the, you know, like without all these government backing into this industry that still happens today, you know, like, does the market survive past 2022 if it was allowed to kind of roll out, or would it have died already, or would it be dying very quickly without propping up? Probably. Like, you know, what are our values? Like, where do we sit with, you know, these things? And why did we privatize Telstra? You know, why did we give Qantas $2.5 billion in non-loan funding instead of buying shares like every other country did in the world of their national airlines during COVID? It's not like we don't have money to transition. COVID proved that. Money is abstract. It has no basis in reality. And so you can make money available for whatever task you desire. And debt is, you know, the world is in trillions of dollars worth of debt to who? Like, it's completely abstract. So you can do it if you want. Doesn't really matter. You know, go into massive amounts of debt, they're just not, like, it's just fake.
Djarra, we're going to move on to the next question, I think now. We've got another question down here at the back.
Yeah, and thanks, Djarra. You're a modern monetary theorist, and there's lots of conversation to be had in that space as well. But this is a question for you, and maybe also for the CSIRO. I'm really interested in what resources are in place, or what budget's there to update the seasonal calendars in a very, in the context of accelerated change and the sort of dynamics we're seeing. Because if there are shifts in ecologies, how is Indigenous ecological knowledge and science going to be mapped against that, like in practical terms? And then I have another question actually about how you're thinking about ecology as a framework for thinking about big systems as well as environmental systems within big systems.
Cool. I think it should be made available, definitely. I think lots of opportunities there to say, like, do quite like extensive engagement to record what changes there are, and then just see how that, you know, kind of overlay it onto the current, you know, I think it'd be great if funding could be given to all communities to go through a seasonal project, to talk to their elders, to their old people, to see what, you know, the system was like, and then do another one to see how it's changed. I think would be awesome. If we could have that, that would be great. I don't work at the Bureau anymore, so I can say that I think the Bureau should spend 3% of its total budget on IWK. So, because it's a weather agency, and 2.6 to 3% of Australians are Indigenous. So I think 3% of the budget should represent that.
I know the Bureau of Meteorology is still working in that space of Indigenous weather knowledge and calendars, etc. In the Climate Systems Hub, I try to make sure that 10 to 15% of our funding is going into Indigenous partnership work, and it's not just weather knowledge calendars, but other aspects of that. The real investment is of people and time to develop a relationship to the point where it's trusted, where a community will actually talk to Western scientists and engage in that process. And I think there's a scary element as well, which I've thought about, that, you know, current knowledge weather seasonal calendar versus a future scenario seasonal calendar, which is engaging in quite a frightening discussion about let's sit together and think about, because we can bring the knowledge from the Western science of what a high emissions or a low emissions future scenario might look like, and let's try to translate that into what I would call a scenario calendar. We haven't attempted that yet, but we have had initial discussions. We're only doing one at the moment through the Climate Systems Hub, which is Northern Peninsula area up the tip of Queensland, just starting on that journey, building those relationships. I think if you look at the map directly behind you, there's so many communities out there. To do them all would be a huge investment. I should be able to answer your question with respect to CSIRO, but honestly, I don't know exactly how much they're putting into that at the moment.
I'll just add, because I was looking at your map online as I was sitting here, and yeah, they're all a lot of the things that have been published are for the top end. There are other maps that exist around the country, and some of those, like the ones in Central Australia, emerged out of language funding. So there's different sort of places where, you know, support for these knowledges emerges. And when you talk about the sort of need for the human resources and those trusted relationships, they exist through a number of disciplines as well as climate sciences. So I think there's a really important discussion to be had there about where that expertise is sitting and how to co-locate so that there's sort of the biggest bang for the buck with, you know, existing relationships around that knowledge. Yeah.
Any other questions to any of our panel members from the audience?
Thank you. Just wanted to say thank you all for sharing, your knowledge and space with all of us today. My question there's two components, and it is quite a large question, but I guess for all of you, if you could share like a few key pillars in this bridge that you mentioned. I'm John, in terms of building this bridge, what does that look like for you all? I think it was really great talking with Leslie, who had to unfortunately leave, about what our idea of the future looked like. So I guess the question is some of the key pillars that you would like to see that change, and also some words of advice in terms of some of the key actions that people can take going forth from this discussion.
And that's a great way, because we can run through, limiting you to 30 seconds each as we go through the whole panel.
I won't answer the question. I'll just set the scene for the other panel to answer. But it's really important to remember that we're talking about parallel knowledge systems, the traditional knowledge system and the Western knowledge system. And the bridge between them, it's around discussion and connection and sharing of knowledge. It's not around bringing things together into one, because they really are parallel knowledge systems. Ollie.
Thanks. Yeah, great question. Yeah, I guess I don't see it so much as a bridge. For me, I more see it as pathways. And the way I see it, like on country, is, you know, old people back home, we had fire pathways, we had water pathways. They have different ways of moving through country, and we were going somewhere. We were using indicators for country to tell us stories about purpose and responsibility, custodianship. And so I think that's really what we need to do. We need to help each other understand the potential of connection and purpose, being able to support each other on those journeys, so that we can more people can see those pathways, just like our old people did. And they're in the landscape. Like, I literally woke up this morning and just found one, just because I wanted to go see the sunrise, and then suddenly I'm in a dreaming place, you know. And so they are all around us, and they have a huge potential for us to learn and grow and support each other.
One would be knowledge building around setting our own research agendas as First Nation people to, you know, actually get our own knowledge put into the science sphere, so that we can build on it for ourselves.
Yeah, I really like, I watched this really good video about from a Native American scholar, and he was talking about kind of mind versus heart relationships with stuff, you know. I kind of didn't, but after that I started really thinking about that kind of heart, or almost like gut based kind of knowledge. And approach and connection to land. And I don't think that's exclusive to any one culture or anything. And like, I was just, basically what you just said about going out and seeing something is it's not always about rationality. Sometimes it's about like that gut feeling, or that sometimes that heart feeling that you get. And I think that can be a real connector and a bridge, right? It's not exclusive. It's, it's just finding that. We're oftentimes tricked into being very like head-based, and sometimes that can get you into trouble. So a bit more heart, maybe.
Thanks. Good question. I would start out with actually having a conversation across the nation about what sort of nation we want to be, like actually having a vision. So if you're thinking about pathways or bridges, you've got to know where you're going. It's the old story. If you don't know where you're going, it doesn't matter which bus you catch. Any bus is as good as any alternative bus. Let's figure out where we want to go. In terms of very concrete things to deal with climate change, we need to put a price on greenhouse gas emissions. Our politics is against this at the moment, but it's the most efficient and effective way of pushing down greenhouse gas emissions. Secondly, we need to innovate, whether it's in agriculture, whether it's in the vehicle sector or anything else. We actually need to innovate to get better solutions so that it becomes a no-brainer to go down the pathway of lower emission options, which still deliver us the things we want. And lastly, we have to have learning communities that accelerate the learning, the things that work and the things that don't, and why, so we can actually adapt to the future much more quickly and effectively than we currently do. And that requires, collaborative communities and acceptance of different types of knowledge.
Mark, you forgot to mention we need to adapt to the changes in extremes that are already locked in.
Absolutely. Yep.
So all of those things, I'll just add two things. One about the story that we imagine for the future, because Mark's right, you can't go somewhere if you don't know where you want to go. And in addition to all the things that people have said, and yes, we can imagine more solar panels and different renewable energy, but I think there's a discussion about what matters to us in terms of what we consume, how much we consume, the way of life that we lead. Yeah, I understand that there's a need to talk enormously about different ways of supplying energy and so on, but I also think we need to think very much more creatively about the amount of energy, the amount of goods and services we consume, particularly for the most affluent people in this very affluent country. Of course, we need to think about redistribution as well. I think we really need to have a serious discussion about what we value in terms of what we grow and what we don't grow. We need to grow health, and we need to grow well-being, and we need to grow justice. We perhaps don't need to grow quite so many large sources of consumerism. So that's just one thought about the kind of place we want to be. In terms of the bridge, again, we could talk about divestment or different forms of engagement within with corporations. We could talk about climate law, we can talk about mobilizing activism, and those things are all going to be important. I mean, there's a conversation, Djarra, you were saying earlier, also about how we listen more carefully across all of these communities, how we connect across and learn from each other. I think that's equally important as, we could talk about a whole range of things that governments can do and corporations can do. But I think this capacity to listen, to learn about how we create change from each other is going to be at least as important. So that's just a couple of thoughts.
I'd like to ask you all to join me in thanking this excellent panel of speakers for this afternoon's session. Thank you all.